Every now and then a true crime story comes along that is just so bizarre, so full of strange coincidences, you'd swear it was made up. Well, this is one of those stories. It's about a ton of money, broken families, and two tragedies at sea that are just eerily similar. But here's the twist. They involve two completely different families.
So let's just cut right to the chase, shall we? You've got two different sons, both with the last name Carman. Both of them stood to inherit a fortune. And in both cases, their mothers vanished while out at sea with them under incredibly suspicious circumstances. I mean, the big question that just hangs over all of this is, how on earth is that even possible?
I mean, when you lay it out like this, side by side, the parallels are just staggering. It feels almost too neat to be real, right? But these are two separate tragedies, two different families. And today we're going to untangle this web and figure out how these two stories, which are totally unrelated, ended up echoing each other in the most bone-chilling ways imaginable. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to dive deep into the really high-profile case of Nathan Carman. Then, I'm going to introduce you to the other, much lesser-known Carman killing. After that, we'll put them side by side to really compare the motives and the methods before we wrap up by exploring the dark legacy of greed that kind of ties them both together. All right, let's kick things off with the case that really grabbed all the headlines. I'm talking about the truly bizarre saga of Nathan Carman and his very, very wealthy and very unlucky New England family. The timeline here is, well, it's everything. It all kicks off in 2013 with a brutal, unsolved murder. Nathan's grandfather. Then, silence for 3 years. Suddenly, his mother vanishes at sea. Years of suspicion bubble under the surface until finally, in 2022, he's indicted for both deaths. But just when it seemed like we might get some answers, the story takes one last, shocking turn. Nathan takes his own life in jail, taking any secrets he had to the grave. So, you might be asking, what was at the absolute heart of all this suspicion? Well, this number right here. $42 million. That was the estimated value of the real estate empire his grandfather had built. For investigators, a number that huge isn't just a detail, it's practically a flashing neon sign for motive. Now, suspicion didn't just fall on Nathan by chance. A really troubling pattern started to emerge. First, he was the last person to see his grandfather alive. Then he conveniently destroys his computer's hard drive. He flat out refused a polygraph. And his story about how his mom just disappeared from their boat, it kept changing. Every single action was just another massive red flag for investigators. And then came this moment. In a police interview, Nathan just casually drops this gruesome detail about his grandfather's death, a detail the police had been very careful to keep out of the news. For the cops in that room, it was a huge slip-up. It suggested he knew way, way more than an innocent person should have. Now, at the very core of Nathan's case was his autism diagnosis, and this became a huge point of contention. Prosecutors basically argued that his behavior, his bluntness, his obsession with details, his kind of detached demeanor was all an act, a mask for a calculating killer. But defense experts fired back, saying the police were just completely misinterpreting his neurodivergence, and they were seeing guilt where there was really just a different way of communicating and processing trauma. Okay, so now I need you to hit the pause button on the Nathan Carman story for just a moment. We're about to make a really sharp pivot here, because I'm going to introduce you to a completely separate story about a different man named Carman and a totally different crime. And I really, really want to hammer this point home. We are now in Long Island, New York. These people have zero relation to Nathan Carman or the Chocolosas family. None. This is a hard reset. Different family, different inheritance, and a different but equally strange tragedy. The timeline in this second case is wow. It is terrifyingly fast. In September of 2018, Thomas Carman's father gets shot and killed in what Thomas says was a home invasion. Just 2 months later, his mother disappears from a fishing boat. 2 parents, dead or missing, in 2 months. That timeline alone was enough to put police on immediate high alert. And just like in Nathan's case, the circumstantial evidence was pretty damning. Investigators were convinced the whole home invasion story was staged. The motive seemed obvious, inheritance. But the real smoking gun? The digital breadcrumbs. His computer search history allegedly showed he'd been looking up how to sink a boat and make a death at sea look like a total accident. With that, he was indicted for both murders. All right, so now that we have both of these unbelievable stories laid out, let's bring them back together. It's time to put them side by side and really understand the shocking similarities and, just as importantly, the critical differences. This table just lays it all out so clearly. You can see the different locations, the different family members who were victims, and the key factors that drove each investigation. But look at that legal outcome. That's the biggest difference of all. Nathan's case ended before it ever got to trial, while Thomas actually faced the justice system. That ambiguity and high drama is exactly why Nathan's story became this huge media sensation, while the other just kind of remained a local tragedy. And look at the numbers here. They were wildly different, right? $42 million versus a few $100,000. But as you can see, the alleged root cause, the motive, was identical. Good old-fashioned greed. In both of these tragedies, the entire case prosecutors built was around this idea that the desire for family money was the spark that led to murder. So, what do we take away from all this? What are the lasting legacies of these two chilling stories? What do they tell us about that dangerous place where family, wealth, and the justice system all collide? And this is where we see two completely different legacies emerge. The Nathan Carman case is a story of justice denied, plain and simple. His suicide left behind nothing but a cloud of unanswered questions and an officially unsolved murder. In contrast, the Thomas Carman case represents justice pursued. You have clear allegations, a path toward a trial. There was at least the possibility of a legal resolution, of a final verdict. But here's what's so fascinating. Despite all their differences, both investigations really faced the same core challenge. The cases were built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. It was all about connecting the dots between behavior, suspicious actions, and money. There was no single smoking gun, no confession, which, as you know, makes getting a conviction incredibly tough. I think this quote from author Casey Sherman just absolutely nails the complex, unresolved nature of Nathan Carman's legacy. Was he a cold, calculating predator who used his autism as a shield, or was he a deeply troubled victim of circumstance, forever judged through a biased lens? Because he never faced a trial, we'll just never know for sure. He's frozen in that state of ambiguity forever. Ultimately, what makes these stories so deeply unsettling is that they feel like modern-day fables. They are gut-wrenching, cautionary tales about how the promise of an inheritance can allegedly poison the most fundamental bond we have, the trust between a parent and a child, and lead to the absolute ultimate betrayal. And that really just leaves us with this one final haunting question. It's obvious the victims paid with their lives, but the destruction just ripples outward, doesn't it? It shatters families, and it leaves behind a legacy of pain and suspicion that can last for generations. It is a really stark reminder of the true, devastating cost of greed.